Welcome, everyone, to the future of underwriting, harnessing the power of data and digitization. I am joined today by Ralph Severini, Global Leader Insurance Alliances at AWS, Preeti Singh, Senior Vice President of Insurance at Emphasis, and Farooq Sheikh, Insurance Go-to-Market Leader at Unqork. And now over to Preeti.
Thank you, Ashley. Quick introduction to Emphasis. We apply next generation technology to help enterprises transform their businesses globally. We are organized in tribes and squads such as experience, data modernization, and along with our domain capabilities, this agile structure allows us to bring together relevant skills to find solutions to customer problems. Additionally, we differentiate ourselves through our transformation approach, which is called front to back or F2B, which is highly customer-centric and it's foundational to the way we work. This approach leverages the power of cloud and cognitive to provide personalized digital experiences to clients and our customers. And in addition to this, our service transformation approach helps clients shrink their core through application of digital technologies across legacy environments within an enterprise. So all of the solutions that we are bringing, to our clients that help them transform the way they do business, many of them leverage low-code, no-code platforms such as Unqork and AWS. These are very pivotal to the work that we do for financial services firms. So over to you, Ralph.
Yeah, thanks, Preeti. And as always, I'm very happy and excited to participate with you and Unqork in helping share our work with our customers within insurance. So at AWS, as you know, I lead our global insurance partnership efforts, working with yourselves and Unqork, for example. When it comes to AWS, three areas that I believe differentiate us in the market include our experience, focus on security, and innovative new solutions and services. Essentially, these three elements have driven our focus for the customer and correspondingly our growth model. Part of that growth model includes growing our partner program, now over 100,000 strong. But really, only a special group of these partners have risen to the top of that program, which includes yourself and Emphasis, Preeti, and Unqork. And quite importantly for us, both Emphasis and Unqork participate in the AWS Marketplace program, where our joint customers can further benefit from acquiring your solutions. So I look forward to our conversation, which is also personally near and dear to my heart, going back to my early days as an underwriter and broker. So I'll turn this over to you, Farooq.
Thank you, Ralph. This is very helpful, and thank you for participating in our a huge thank you to you as well in terms of the thought leadership and the part broadly. So I welcome everyone to the Tech Talk. Very excited. We have a very in terms of how the collection of companies here are helping to transform the industry. In terms of a brief introduction, Unqork, as you would know, is a no-code platform. We were born in insurance and similarly regulated complex environments, and we're working with large insurers to transform underwriting, to transform the industry broadly in terms of speed to market and in terms of reducing the technology barriers to change. In terms of our footprint today, we work with more than 100 customers, digitizing their core applications with a major focus on P&C underwriting, ranging from personal lines to commercial. As we mentioned before, we have a large amount of partnerships, including with our partners at AWS, on which we deploy as well as leverage a lot of the AWS toolkits, as well as with Emphasis, who is one of our leading SI partners. And the core goal here is to accelerate transformation without the utilization of any code. And we are quite proud to have achieved kind of a successful set of milestones in that direction. So welcome, everyone. So on this slide, what we wanted to do, if I could invite Preeti to talk a little bit about the unique and evolving nature of insurance, would love to get your perspective.
Thanks, Farooq. And I think I'll talk about, primarily focus on the top three, which are also very relevant to our discussion today. So if you look at digital products and services, I mean, there's clearly been an evolution across various sectors, but in insurance as well. There are a lot of digital channels available today within insurance firms, but many of them are nothing but a front end, which are used to get data inputs from customers, and then the insurance works on the data inputs, right? So take the example of claims. The whole value chain for claims is not tied together digitally because carriers typically don't integrate with their vendors. So what carriers are looking for now is not only the ability to submit the claim, but the ability to self-service the entire claim yourself. Ability to take a picture, get an estimate back, identify the appropriate repair shop, schedule the repair, and then integrate within the enterprise to have your rental car meet you at the shop so you're not inconvenienced. And all of this done within a few minutes on your mobile phone. So the way the entire value chain gets tied together allows the whole process to be done optimally and for the carrier to not be involved significantly, right? And this will allow carriers to continue to scale their businesses. So now let's talk about the second one, right? The legacy systems and how this leads to disconnected underwriter experiences. So legacy systems across the industry are a huge challenge. Legacy is problematic, especially in the context of underwriting, in two ways, right? So carriers are looking at launching new products very quickly. They want to pivot to more profitable products. So, for instance, they want to launch, SME commercial products, or look at new lines which were previously residual lines for them. And multiple legacy systems result in disparate data sets. So they may have 13 different systems for various products. If you want to launch a multi-line commercial policy, it's pretty difficult to get the right set of data and do that. Secondly, if you're looking to ramp up a residual line, then carriers have not built workflows or policy rules for that before. So relying on their legacy environment or traditional platforms to do this can take 2 to 3 years, and carriers don't have time for that, right? So platforms such as Unqork and AWS, right, which create completely new experiences, new workflows, and of course, potentially provide an end-to-end platform are something that carriers are looking at pretty aggressively. And then finally, on the risk selection, right? So carriers are looking at new approaches to identifying risk. They want to look at data both retrospectively and proactively to think about what sort of new exposures are there. They're looking at deepening the solutions using the data. So again, taking the examples of an auto, there is a black box in the car, and that has enough data in the car to either look at process the claim as well, or to potentially underwrite or renew a particular policy. Carriers are also looking at aggregating up all of the data that they're getting from various sensors and present it in a view in a way that the human in the loop, which in this case an underwriter, can make a effective decision. So those are some of the areas that I wanted to touch upon, which I think are really changing the way insurers and property casualty insurers work today and will continue to work in the future. So back to you, Farooq.
Well, thank you, Preeti. This is an interesting area where we're seeing, as you mentioned, massive changes across multiple dimensions, right? Like whether it's the channels, whether it's the technology environment, whether it's the customer expectation, driven by a number of experiences outside of insurance, which is impacting how insurance experiences are being anticipated as well. And very much the case as it pertains to underwriting as well, right? And what we're also seeing is a difference in underwriting transformation across lines of businesses, right? So very much in the personal lines and small commercial spaces, we're seeing a higher amount of focus on what we would think of as underwriting automation, similar to Apple. And then as we come into mid-market and large and specialty lines, there's a significant amount of focus on underwriting digitization, right? And those are the trends that are driven by all these factors, including the rate and the pricing environment and so forth. So really appreciate your perspective. As we continue to move onto slide 7, maybe what we wanted to do here was to describe a little bit of what we are seeing as the archetype of the solution that's emerging, and would love to kind of call upon both of you to provide your expertise along the way as well. But generally, we are seeing a very significant focus on underwriting in lines with the areas that I mentioned, either automation of underwriting for certain lines or digitization of underwriting for the more complex lines. So a couple of observations to make across the kind of value chain here, right? So underwriting, if we think about insurance broadly, and if I think about P&C specifically, underwriting has emerged to be the biggest area of focus across the broader insurance client base, right? So we're kind of seeing that focus and attention being paid to underwriting for every line of business, whether it's the inclusion of more external data elements or the emergence of the data ecosystem to those external data elements, whether it is the emphasis on the experience capabilities or the experience kind of that underwriters might have, whether it is the focus on process digitization and automation, or whether it is the inclusion of a more sophisticated set of data and analytical models, right? So we're seeing this range of activities going from an emphasis on automation and digitization to experience to process digitization, as well as the inclusion of better data. This is very consistent, as I mentioned, across lines of businesses and across industries and across companies and geographies, right? So we're seeing this as a global movement in terms of digitization, whether that's on the property side or casualty, commercial auto. Each line has a slightly different ecosystem, so to speak. When you get into property, there's a lot of on, hey, can we get better data around, right? Or can we get better data around catastrophic scenarios and so forth. When we get into workers' comp, it's all about getting more specific and detailed understanding of the kind of perils that we might see in the workers' comp scenario and so forth, right? So it's a very specific evolution of the data ecosystem, but all coming together with the experience concentration components. The other two elements on this slide that I just wanted to touch before opening it up for discussion is we're also seeing historic in terms of underwriting. One of the biggest problems in the commercial space has been the lack of digital data as the submissions come through to the insurers, right? Like the submissions typically come through emails, and then given they're not digitized, they're a massive process on the insurer side to transform them into something digital before underwriting start to take place. So there's a very significant from every insurer to digitize the incoming submissions, to create a digital front door. We are seeing movement in the insurer space as well as broker space to create API ecosystems, right? Like where you're transmitting the submissions and the quotes through APIs. However, that movement is in its infancy. So there is a desire by insurers and brokers to have a front door that is agnostic to the technology evolutionary speed. As brokers move to have more APIs, carriers want to stay in lockstep with them, but they also want to accommodate paper business. They want to accommodate business that's coming through emails, right? So that multi-dimensional front door that can accommodate email-based submissions, that can accommodate API-based submissions, and that can rapidly tap into new distribution sources is emerging to be an interesting area of focus. That is the first point of entry into the underwriting workbench. What we're seeing there is the underwriting workbench then becomes a combination of the underwriter experience, digital data from the submission, enrichment of that data from internal and external sources, along with sophisticated data analytical models where system greatest tooling is being utilized to facilitate and digitize the writing process. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the underwriting ecosystem. This is all kind of supported by massive investments in cloud, data lake, and data analytical technologies. So with that in mind, what I wanted to do was Ralph, if I may ask for your perspective of what you're seeing in the industry from an underwriting perspective and how insurers are looking to make it more seamless.
Well, Farooq, that was well summarized. You put a lot into that. So a couple of remarks, to set the context to this, especially in the commercial insurance world, we have to appreciate the size of the global business market, which the World Bank estimates at some 300 million businesses. These are all customers globally, with about 31 million of those in the US. Those numbers alone reflect the enormous opportunity for transforming commercial insurance underwriting to a faster, maybe more flexible and scalable platform. So fundamental to this aim, and that I've been hearing continually from insurers probably over the past 6 to 8 years, is the desire to modernize their data estate so that better risk decisioning and profiling can be automated, but maybe also to fundamentally improve areas like pricing and rating. And I think, as you can see in this slide, we've seen a substantial uptick by insurers to incorporate the use of solutions like Redshift for data lakes and Amazon SageMaker from our side to get better insights on what that data means. Personally, I think coupling that with the speed at which insurers can incorporate high-speed and low-code insurance-driven solutions like what you offer really have the potential to transform what I used to do, which meant wading through masses of documents and spreadsheets to underwrite risks, to really a more automated approach. It may be my last point here is I see this with insurers globally as their need to respond and essentially get ahead of market conditions. I think the pandemic further forced commercial insurers to develop more robust data sources and then, hopefully start including them into their underwriting processes. It was essentially no longer possible to get field underwriters or loss control engineers. And I did some of that work out in the field, but now you really can't because you can't get to the commercial customer or agent. And at the same time, new exposures and new opportunities have to be captured by insurers. I'm personally very well involved with our cyber cover insurance market, which is the fastest growing segment of commercial. And I reflect back to Jerome Powell, our Fed chairman last year, I think it was around May in CBS 60 Minutes. He cited that cyber attacks really represent the #1 long-term existential threat to the global economy, not the pandemic. So in this vein, I think insurers have to make decisions around risks with a limited amount of historical data, and underwriters must correspondingly look at new and non-traditional data sources so they can get better insights into their risks and portfolios. So I'd say for data state transformation coupled with new ways to gather insights are pretty much essential to the needs of what I see today in the global insurance market. And I'll turn this back to you.
Thank you, Ralph, and that makes perfect sense. We're seeing very similar trends. Preeti, if I may, as you think about the transformation in the underwriting space, your thoughts to share across the various dimensions we've talked about?
Yeah, thanks, Farooq. And I think you and Ralph summarized, the challenges that carriers and underwriters are facing really well across experience, automation, and data. And that's precisely what we are seeing in the market in terms of demand. So There is a big rebound in personal lines from the pandemic in terms of demand. And on the commercial line side, we have a number of our customers who are really looking at getting into additional businesses, looking at really scaling up their business over the next 5 years. But they want to get, they want to do a much more underwriting, much more claims, but they want to do it with a much lower headcount because COVID, kind of exposed the fault lines in the way they do business today, and if they do want to scale, right, with the old traditional models are not going to serve them well. So we have like carriers, who have primarily done property casualty lines. Now they want to write, let's say, E&S lines, but it's almost like a baseline because these were viewed as residual lines before. So they have literally no baseline to work with, right? It's almost like greenfield, sorry. So when carriers want to pivot, they want to really do this really fast, but they run up against three challenges. One is the whole legacy modernization issue that I spoke about earlier, and then the operationalization issue, and finally the next gen data issue. And carriers are looking at solutions, right, with the help from firms like Unqork and AWS. And of course, we are involved in many of these conversations in terms of how do they handle legacy, the operationalization issue, and then the next gen data issue. From a legacy perspective, right, if you're looking to build a new product, carriers can't do it fast. They don't have the data. They haven't built the workflow before or policy rules. So relying on launching their product through traditional methods is very problematic. And that's a big advantage to low-code, no-code platforms. So carriers are looking at building something completely in low-code or build out a platform that will front end and do most of the workflow for the system that they are building behind so that they can at least get started from an underwriting perspective. And then when you can come to operationalization, there is a number of challenges here, right? So submission volumes have gone up quite significantly. And underwriters want to avoid the multiple screenings. They really want to focus on what they do best, which is really the art of underwriting, right? They want to price the risk, they put together the right package for the insurer. And that's where, right, what you talked about, the digital front door, that's something that is that carriers are looking at very actively, automating all of the DNQs based on rules related to risks, geo licensing, eliminating all of the manual work that this digital front door will allow them to do is something that's in high demand. And then the next step, which is more the harder part, right, which I think which Ralph talked about, automation of the premium calculation and rating. So this is really looking at all of the data challenges. How do we gather all the pieces of publicly available data or data that insureds gather through wearables and sensors that not only help them assess the risk better, and also helps insurers and underwriters create new products and new streams of revenue. So that underwriters basically focus largely on tweaks and adjustments or re-rating. They focus more on the human aspect of underwriting rather than gathering all of this data together and trying to make sense of the data. And finally, Ralph talked about, right, the changing nature of risk, especially in SME mid-market. They have rapidly evolved their business models. Like if you look at restaurants, there's a lot of seating outside. And so, they have to follow new approaches, new business models, and risks have changed. Insurers have kind of renewed through 2020, 2021. They had lack of staff, employees. So they've done the renewals because they want to keep the risk on the books, but they really want to get additional sources of data, source this data, and run the right kind of algorithms very, very quickly to assess how the risk has changed in the marketplace. And finally, the next gen data that we spoke about previously, how carriers are looking at new ways of evaluating risks using the additional data that is becoming available, right? So sensors are enriching the data. However, if an underwriter gets 1,000 data attributes from these multiple sensors, then it slows them down and they don't have the time to look at all of them. So in this kind of a scenario, there's a need for a workbench where the data is aggregated in one spot. The algorithms are run against it based on the parameters of the policy. And this is presented back to the underwriter that in a way that helps them make the decision. So I think the solution that you're talking about will be demoing shortly. It's really exciting because it's really the need of the hour. And all of our carriers, customers that we're talking to are looking at different aspects of the solution and building this out over the next year.
Perfect. No, this is great. I think with that, we should look to jump in, if that makes sense. Let's kind of go through, we have a few minutes left, go through the demo, and then happy to take some questions right after that. So with that, I wanted to quickly share my screen. As we have talked through, and Ralph and Preeti both addressed these points, like we typically have this interaction of broker and underwriter that comes together from an underwriting perspective, right? So what I'll do here, just as I'm getting started, I'll start off with the broker. I'll start off with, hey, how would the broker think about suggesting or submitting a quote, or how could they, right? So as I was reading and talking through this process, I have a broker submission kind of approach available. The broker is kind of looking at a particular account, in this case, Unqork. They are looking at whether there's any kind of, Ralph, I picked a cyber as an example, given your points around cyber, just like making up a set of kind of questions for a particular insured. What you can very quickly get into is, hey, this is for a cyber product, the kind of coverages that you might need for that particular insurer, what the exposure might look like over time, what are the key threat vectors that a cyber product might have, right? And if the chosen a different product, the ability would have been to kind of bring up the right underwriting questions for those, right? So as we get to this point, the kind of point is to submit the particular claim or particular risk to the underwriters. And as you can see, we have submitted Unqork as the kind of particular insurer. It's been assigned like all the kind of various dimensions. As I move over to the underwriter side, right? So what we are looking at now is the underwriting dashboard, right? And there's a couple of different things to keep in mind. So one is that you have the ability to straight through process certain submissions, right? If they fall within your risk appetite and so forth, right? So these are all the kind of submitted and bound applications. You can see what is the activity log by line of business, where things are coming through from a submission perspective that need to be actioned over a particular time. In this case, what we are looking at is a referral flow. So Unqork, as it was submitted, had particular indications where the underwriter has to go in and have a look. So we have already assigned a particular underwriter based on the complexity of the risk and the line of business. You can always go in and reassign it or bulk reassign it as people leave and so forth, so that kind of functionality exists. But you can also, interestingly, have a look at review functionality, right? Now you can kind of go into a particular risk and say, okay, let's review what has been submitted, right? So as you would expect, the submission information that was provided is all there, but you also have additional kind of demarcation. So you have case details, you have underwriting kind of journey, you have broker information and all that you would expect. But as you continue to move forward, what you also have are the pieces of information that were provided by the broker, but the ability for the underwriter to start kind of evaluating particular elements based on the data provided or based on their external kind of evaluation score, right? They also can, for example, go into the account and look at the third-party data that can be gathered on that particular insured, right? So they can look at the cyber events for that particular insured. They can look at the various kind of sources of data that might be available to them in the underwriting process. And based on that, you are using external data and using internal data, and then getting into a scenario where you're thinking through the deductibles, all the levers that you have in your disposal, and getting to a point where you can execute a rater and then move on from to creation of a quote, right? You can provide, one of the key elements here is that you have an interaction component, right? So this is a particular case, and the underwriters are able to create a quote and send it back to the broker, and then the broker can review it and choose to bind it, all from within Unqork, right? So what you're saving here is like a single screen for the underwriters to process and underwrite all the various risks and interact with the brokers, and for the brokers to kind of over time manage their books of business as well, right? And this simplifies the entire interaction process, but it also expedites the underwriting process and improves the ability for the underwriters to bring in third-party data sources and third-party kind of internal models and so forth into the underwriting process. So wanted to kind of pause here. I know we're running at time, so I wanted to thank everyone for the discussion. Also wanted to check if there's any questions that we can address from the audience.
Farouk, really nicely done there on the cyber piece. I might know a couple of insurers that might be interested in the walkthrough that you just gave. And you should tell everybody this was not planned, by the way.
So I know that's a fair point, right? I think there's a question here from the audience around how does the platform handle files? So there's so Unqork, by definition, right, like it has a couple of different ways of handling files, right? So for example, you have the Amazon S3 buckets, so we can integrate into S3 and kind of move files in and out that way. That's one approach. We also have a MongoDB or a NoSQL database, right? So it's a file-based database to begin with. So you can upload files. We can kind of manage like a filing system, so to speak, and then transmit files securely as needed, right? So it's a full-blown file management capability with the ability to integrate with most of the external and file management capabilities, including Amazon S3. Any other questions? Again, appreciate the time from the audience, as well as wanted to thank our panelists here in terms of the partnership and in terms of the presentation. Really appreciate the joint kind of efforts to support the industry. I think there's one other question in the Q&A, and it basically says, if a company is acquiring small entities quite often, then how helpful would that be? I think I can answer that one. I think the fun part here is that as you acquire entities, you might have a lot of different admin systems that accumulate, and I'll call on Preeti to kind of add to that answer as well. But what you can do with Unqork is that you can have your underwriting process consistently managed via Unqork, sitting on top of multiple different admin systems, and that's a very common pattern. Preeti, would you add to that question from your perspective?
Yeah, and Farooq, that's exactly, I think, what we are also seeing, right? So we have customers that have 13 to 14 systems just for, let's say, auto, right? And we are looking at Unqork like platforms to say, okay, how do we build the experience and the workflow upfront? And then, of course, from a data perspective, right, building out an API factory to be able to source the data from the multiple systems. So we would look at a low-code, no-code platform really from an experience parameterized workflows to be able to access the data from these multiple systems and then make the underwriting process much simpler. Great.
No, this is great. I think we have one more question. I think we've addressed that one. I wanted to thank everyone. Special thanks to Ralph and Preeti in terms of kind of supporting and the partnership broadly and working on this topic together. And really wanted to thank our audience. Our contact information is on the screen, so feel free to reach out directly to any one of us, and really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Farooq.
Yeah.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, Ralph.
Same here.
Thanks.
Farooq.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.